So we have already learned two Angular directives, ngForm and ngModel. We know what they are responsible for, and now it is time to dive deeper and explore what happens under the hood and how those two directives relate to each other. This video is not mandatory and you can safely skip it if you like. This video is for those who really like to know a little bit more about the internal implementation of Angular features, but it is not mandatory for the further videos in the course. So let's get started from ngModel. I'm going to pick the first input as a test subject, and using the already familiar getDirectives method, I get the list of all directives that reside on this node. So you can see three directives. The first two ones I'm going to skip because we will cover them in separate videos, and let's focus on the ngModel. Here you can see properties that should be already familiar to you. The model property that keeps basically the value of the form control, and here you can see the name property, and it is exactly what we defined for every form control as a name property in the component template. Also, besides those two, there are a couple of other properties I would like to highlight here. The first one is the control property, whose value is an instance of some form control class. The form control class is one of the four building blocks in Angular forms, and it is responsible for tracking the value and validation status for every single form control. Basically, it represents a state of the form control, right? We will learn more about form control in the section about reactive forms, because in reactive forms we work with these form building blocks directly, while in template-driven forms they are kind of encapsulated by the directives like ngModel, but it allows us to build forms declarative way. So far, just treat the form control as a representation of the form control state, and it is a single source of truth for the ngModel directive. You can see here some properties of the ngModel class like value, valid or invalid. They all are getters that read the corresponding value from this form control. That's it. The following property I would like to mention is form directive, and it contains the reference to the ngForm where this ngModel directive has been declared. It needs this reference because ngModel is also responsible for registering its form control instance inside the ngForm directive, and ngForm is a kind of aggregator of all form controls declared within the form. The form control registration happens inside the ngOnChanges lifecycle hook of ngModel. It happens by calling setUpControl method that eventually calls addControl method, and there happens already the registration of the control in the ngForm using the name we provided as a key and the form control instance as a value. So if we get back to the ngForm directive instance, we will see the following picture. The ngForm has the property called form, and this is an instance of form group. The form group is another building block of the Angular forms that we will cover more in the section about reactive forms. But basically, the responsibility of this class is quite similar to form control ones. It is tracking the value and validation status, but this time for the collection of form controls. And for instance, if at least one form controls within the group becomes invalid, then the whole form group becomes invalid. And the same is applicable for other form control states. So this form property contains all our form controls registered by ngModel directives in our form. Here you can see the object where the key is a name we provided for ngModel, and the value is the corresponding form control instance, and this is the reason why that name property is required. Because the form group and form control extend the same abstract control, they have many common properties, and one of them is value. But unlike the form control that stores one single value, the form group has an object that contains values of all form controls and nested groups. Yeah, we can have nested form groups, but we will learn it a little bit later in this course. But so far, let's recap what we have learned. Apart from all, the ng model directive is also a container and owner of the form control instance that is the smallest building block of Angular forms. The form control is responsible for the value tracking and validation state of an individual form control like input, select, etc. Additionally, ng model has a reference to the parent ng form directive that is basically a container for the form group instance, which is grouping multiple form control instances and tracks value and validation status for the whole group of controls. So the value for the form group will be an aggregation of all form controls within this group.